Hello there, and welcome to Nothing Ventured, Nothing Gained. I am your Rules Arbiter Steve, and here to bring you a video on our continuing series on the new Pathfinder Remastered or Player Core classes. We did take a short reprieve and go over some other videos. We actually even did a Transformers stream. But now we're back to Pathfinder. And this time we're going over, as I said before, the Ranger is the master of wilderness and expert tracker, or maybe a familiar character drawing two swords and having a panther companion, whoever that could be. So stay tuned as we take a deep dive into what abilities the Ranger gets, how can they be built differently, and see if the Ranger is the right class for you. So what is a Ranger? As many of you if you've watched the series before, you know I go over what a Ranger is in a kind of generic concept. If you don't know or are new to D&D or Pathfinder, if you're already familiar with it and you've seen these videos before, you can kind of skip past this. I'll put the little time-stampy whatchamacallits down below so you can skip past this part and get to the important parts of the video. Well, technically I think they're all important, but important for you. But for those who don't know, or have only a generalized and see what they've seen in movies and various TV shows and what a Ranger potentially could be, tag along as we go over this part, the particulars of what a Ranger is in the idea of like D&D and then the overall fantasy concept in RPG games. So Rangers are actually in a lot of different fantasy games. They're fantasy RPGs. Similar to other classes, Rangers generally have a mix of the natural or nature elements of Druid. Sometimes they're seen with limited spellcasting ability, sometimes without. A lot of times they're portrayed as woodsmen and trackers, and also have a limited martial ability similar to the fighter, while foregoing the most heaviest of armors, preferring to have a more mobile playstyle, and able to sneak, hide, and track through various different types of terrains, being a very self-sufficient character, able to survive even thrive in the most natural environments. Former versions of D&D have seen things like favorite enemies, favorite terrain, and animal companions, and also some notable characters of Rangers are Aragorn from the Lord of the Rings series, as well as Dungeons & Dragons, as we mentioned before, done by R.A. Salvatore, and in the Dungeons & Dragons games, Drizzt Do'Urden is probably the Dark Elf Ranger, who's probably the most notable Dungeons & Dragons Ranger that people think of when they think Ranger. So Rangers can be roped into the always wielding the bow character, but can be typically seen as usually using two different iconic styles. One focusing on the bow or a range style, others similar to Drizzt and even Aragorn in the movies and the books as well, seen a two-weapon fighting style. While they do get the abilities in game, they're also seen typically a more skilled character than the run-of-the-mill fighter. The run-of-the-mill fighter, like take Gimli for example, most of his abilities center around fighting. Taking Aragorn, he's tracking, he's detecting monsters coming to get him. He's also potentially commanding other people. So the Ranger is kind of a slightly more jack-of-all-trades fighter, foregoing some of the martial abilities and some of the druidic abilities, and tends to be more woodsman style. So now we're going to go over the main abilities and characteristics of what the Ranger gets in the Pathfinder 2nd Edition Player Core, this version of the game, and what their starting proficiency look like. A lot of what you see in Ranger actually mirrors quite a bit what the fighter gets. They do start with expert perception, expert in fortitude and reflex saves, which is exactly the same as the fighter, but you will notice that they do get more skills than the fighter, which really shows how well-rounded that the Ranger can be. So the Ranger does get more access to skills, whether you want that to focus on the woodsman, survival, hunting, tracking, or maybe you want to focus on the idea of that your Ranger knows all about monsters, so they take a lot of the knowledge skills to get really good at that, or they just take a variety of skills that you find useful. Like I said, stealth is another good one. So depending on how you want to build your Ranger. They do forego heavy armor proficiency and training in advanced weapons, but that kind of shows you that they spread their time amongst other avenues, it's most specifically their skills, and don't get those advanced trainings in armor and weapons. They do get martial and all simple and all martial weapons as for trained. So unlike fighters, Rangers do get a selection at first level. This ability is called the Hunter's Edge, and this lets them interact with their hunted prey in various different ways. Effectively, their hunted prey is the one target that they single out, whether they're tracking them or actively see in combat, and they go, that's my target, that's who I'm going after. And the hunted prey activity gives them a couple of bonuses, and the Hunter's Edge lets them interact with that marked target in a variety of different ways. The Hunter Prey is an action activity where the Ranger can designate a single target. At least at first level, they can select a single target. There are ways to upgrade this further with feats, but at its base, you select one target, whether you can see the target or whether you're actively tracking it. And it gives you several bonuses, just perception and survival to seek and track it down, as well as it lets you use your Hunter's Edge ability. And this is the selection you have to make at first level. Which one of these Hunter Edge abilities do you want? In your level 1 choice with your Hunter's Edge, you will choose some or which designated to add additional damage by increasing the damage the first attack you make every round, adding a bunch of precision damage. That is the precision choice. Either that, or you can decide if you want to go with a more multiple attack oriented Ranger. You can make the penalty for attacking multiple times called multiple attack penalty. That is incorporated into Pathfinder 2nd edition. It reduces that penalty, so you get a higher likelihood of hitting with your many attacks. As if you want to go with the two wielding option, or maybe you're shooting tons and tons of arrows at somebody. That is called the flurry option. The final option is outwit, which gives you several bonuses to skills like deception, intimidate, stealth, and recall knowledges to help identify the monster, as well as increasing your armor class against the hunted prey. So you can even play a solely skill-focused Ranger and really hone in on the idea that you're the hunter, the tracker, the one who finds the ones that you are hunting down. Obviously, each one of these paths or options has a bunch of feat upgrades as you go through and level up as a Ranger, increasing their effectiveness or giving you multiple different options, and potentially even sharing these abilities with some of your compatriots. Now, if you've been enjoying this video so far, give us a big old thumbs up so the machine spirits will show us to more viewers just like you. And if you're not subscribed, consider hitting that big subscribe button and clicking the notification bell so you know when we come out with new videos. Now we're going to talk about the changes that the Rangers went through from the original 2nd edition, Pathfinder 2nd edition, to the new Player Core. There were quite a bit of changes. Not a lot of them were majorly significant, but there were a slew of changes beyond just name changing. Obviously, ability that stayed the same, but the name changed from this name to that name. So we're not going to go over the name changes, but we are going to go over any ability that actually had active changes to it. First, we're going to go over one change to a class feature. Now, this change was it's a slight nerf to a very high level ability. So this ability is the 19th level ability called Second Skin, but they renamed it to Medium Armor Mastery. This ability increased the proficiency of the Ranger's armor with light, medium, and unarmored to master level. That hasn't changed. But this ability used to provide a benefit for being able to sleep in armor without getting fatigued, which is something you normally can't do unless you have a special trait on your armor. This ability was removed, so it is a slight nerf, but a nerf nonetheless, something you'd be aware of if you do play at high levels. Just a side note before we get into the majority of the feat changes. If you're using the Archive of Nethys, which is a great website, and you should use it. If you're playing Pathfinder, you should use this website, the Archive of Nethys site. If you are looking at the entry from Animal Companion, it only gives you the generic Druid entry. It doesn't include what's actually in the rulebook, and I checked the errata, and this hasn't changed. The Animal Companion for the Ranger is missing one key line if you're looking at the remastered content. And that is your hunted, when you mark up prey with your hunted prey, your Animal Companion gains all the benefits of your hunt prey action as well as your Hunter's Edge. This part is for some reason not in the Archive of Nethys website link, but just to be mindful, if you're only using Nethys, be aware that they do get access to this, and your animal companion, if you choose to take one, you don't have to take one, but if you have an animal companion, they get all the benefits you get when you mark a target with hunt prey and all your hunter's edge stuff. Now on to the changes in the feats for the ranger. Before we get into all the feat changes, there are going to be two overarching changes, which I'm going to mention now, and I'm not going to mention them again later unless there's other changes. One thing is, Rangers had access to taking focus spells, and this is the only spellcasting they ever got access to. They didn't get spell slots like in previous editions of Dungeons & Dragons or even Pathfinder. In Pathfinder 2nd Edition, they only get focus spells. But if you played the original 2nd Edition, you know that each focus spell was its own special feat. And each one had its listing of, okay, you get X spell, and then you get Y spell. Now they have consolidated all these spells into generic feats at certain levels. And to get the higher level spells, you take the higher level feat, but they're all consolidated into one single feat, which if you want more spells, you just take the feat multiple times. Some of these changes actually turn into benefits for the Ranger with being able to get access to spells that you'd had to wait till later to take, but we'll talk about that later. And the second major removal is anything that ever said snares. Snares have been eradicated from the game, at least so far. Now, Rangers did have quite a few feats that gave them benefits for snares, setting up snares, getting certain recipes for snares, all the snares. They were the snare class. Everything that had the word snare in it, it's gone. There was a blog post before the remastered version of the rules came out, and they were making blog posts about the things they were changing and the reasons why they were changing it. I'll link that down below so you can take a read on it. It is an older post, but it goes into why they talked about removing snares, and they are reworking and rebalancing snares, and I think they mentioned that it's going to come out in Player Core 2, so some of these feats may be reintroduced later, but for now, if you're looking for snares and you had the snares, stick with the 2nd Edition original. You won't find snare stuff in this until they come out with a new book. So the first major feat change is something I kind of already half mentioned already. All the different focus spells were reconsolidated into a single feat at various levels. So this time, the feat is called Initiate Warden Feat, and you are available at first level. And you can select the Magic Fur spell, which originally, from the original 2nd Edition, you had to wait till level 2 to take the spell. So the spell's requirement was bopped down to level 1 and incorporated into the feat. And basically, when you take it, you pick which spell you want from that rank. Simple as that. So this is a little bit of a buff. So if you wanted to have the Magic Fur spell, it's not now competing with 2nd level feats. It is competing with your 1st level feats and all the other focus spells. Crossbow Ace is another 1st level feat that was completely reworked. Actually, if you go to that blog post I talked about before, they actually talk about why they changed it. It kind of became a you must take feat. If you wanted to use crossbows, it kind of was like a requirement. So they wanted to try to step away from having things of you must take this, you must take that to be the best character, and give more circumstantial bonuses in certain situations. Formerly, this was just a passive benefit. If you took a certain action, if you reloaded, you got a bonus to crossbow damage. Now, this is a one-action activity that lets you take cover or make a distraction and reload, giving you a little bit of action economy if you're deciding to use a crossbow. Crossbows tend to have reload values, and bows tend to have a reload of 0, so it doesn't cost you any actions to reload them. So crossbows need a little bit of help. If you're running a crossbow ranger, similar to Harsk, the iconic, this is a feat you might want to look into. At 4th level, you can select another warden feat called Advanced Warden. The same thing. It's the same spells were available here as an original, but also they added the Enlarged Companion spell to this. Normally, you could take this feat. So right now, you can take this feat at 4th level for the remaster. Originally, you needed to wait until 8th level to take Enlarged Companion. So this is a huge buff if you want to have an animal companion that just grows to an obnoxious size. You don't have to wait all the way till 8th level, and it's now not competing with 8th level feats. It is now competing down with 4th level feats if you decide to take an animal companion and the spell. Speaking of 8th level, the Deadly Aim feat had a slight trait change. The original version had the open trait, which originally meant that you could only use an ability with the open trait if you didn't use any other open abilities or you didn't use any abilities with the attack trait. From what I've seen in the book, they've completely removed the open trait. Apparently there was some confusion of when you can use and when you couldn't use the open trait. They've replaced it with the flourish trait, meaning that you can only, flourish just means is you can only use one ability with the flourish trait each turn. So you can use as many abilities as you have actions, but if it has the flourish trait, can't use another flourish action. Jumping all the way to level 12, all classes that I've seen in the book, and I believe that they've mentioned this across the board, any class that has focus points access has an upgrade feat at level 12. Or maybe at other levels, but for the most part, it's at level 12. Normally, when you refocus, you get a single focus point back. The old upgrade feat let you get 2 back. Now the upgrade feat just lets you get all your focus points back with 1 refocus, and this is a change that they have made to all classes with focus points. At level 14, we have a straight up removal of the whole feat, which is called targeting shot. It was in the original Pathfinder. It is no longer in the player core. It was a feat with the press trait, which meant you had to have built up multiple attack penalty, and all it did is ignore all cover and the concealed condition of the target you were shooting at. Level 16 saw a slight change. This is a really minor change to the specialized companion feat. All the text is the same. The way this feat functions is the same, which basically lets you pick a specialization for your animal companion if you've chosen a lot of the upgrade feats for animal companion. The only change that they put is they put the verbiage in the feat stating that you can take this feat up to 3 times, selecting a different specialization each time. So you can't double up on the specialization, albeit I don't even think you'd want to. But this gives you the ability to take multiple specializations. At level 16, you only have 3 feats left, 16, 18, and 20. You can make your animal companion super specialized. Also at this level, at level 16, was a new feat called Warden's Reload, which we're going to take a look at that a little later because that's a brand new feat that they added. They actually talked about it in that blog post I mentioned. But well, like I said, we'll mention that a little bit later as we go over the new feats, which is the only feat that they added was that feat. At level 18, saw a few changes, and one of them was another focus point upgrade feat, which was just removed. It's called Warden's Wellspring. It just let you get more focus points back, so that's gone. There was another feat at level 18 called Impossible Volley, which basically let you, if you had a volley weapon like a longbow or any weapon with the volley trait, let you pick a target and throw stupid amounts of arrows in that target. Basically, let you attack everyone in that area. It used to have the open trait. It lost the open trait. As we talked about before, reasons why the open trait doesn't exist anymore. And finally, at level 18, there was the Impossible Flurry, which lets you attack with your 2 weapons, basically 6 times, just as you're a Ginsu machine, just chopping through people. Originally, this feat was split into 2 different feats. There was the Impossible Flurry feat at 18, and at 20, there was an upgrade to this feat, which reduced some of the penalties you would take. All that is now baked into the Impossible Flurry feat, and the level 20 upgrade was removed. It was all condensed down to the level 18 feat. While there are quite a bit more changes from compared to the fighter, from our last video, these changes are mostly minor, with either slight buffs or nerfs. Especially with the Warden spells, which is just a lot of removal of clutter that was in the Ranger because all the different focus spells are now compiled together into single feats at certain levels. And also in a lot of cases, granted you ability to take spells at way earlier levels than you normally could before. And while you do miss out, at least for now, with the removal of snares, if that was your thing, I think that those feats or something similar is going to make some sort of comeback in the new Player Core 2, at least in some way. I'm not even sure. They might even add in new Ranger feats to give Rangers back snares once they've rebalanced them. But for the most part, the Ranger is unchanged or got slight improvements. With the exception of that one nerf with their medium armor expertise staying at 19th level, they can't sleep in their armor. Just get comfort armor and you'll be fine. So now we can take a look at that new feat that we talked about before called Warden's Reload. At level 16, you can take this feat, and what it gives you is it gives you a free action once per round that allows you to reload your weapon if your last action in the turn was to cast a Warden spell or a focus spell. So while this feat doesn't really play well with other classes, if you've multi-classed or taken some other dedications that may give you focus points, because it does specifically call out Warden spells, which is the Ranger's special focus spells. And it does have a slight limitation of it has to be the last action in your turn. The last action in your turn is to cast your Warden spell, whatever that may be, and then your weapon has to be unloaded for you to get this benefit. But it does, for this feat to trigger, action autonomy is still something that I and many of us value in Pathfinder characters. But at level 16, there are quite a few good options, so there is some competition for this feat, depending on which type of Ranger you want to be. Rangers tend to fall into 3 or 4 major categories, or 5, or add an extra one if you want to have an amalgamation. While I don't think these are the only way to play the Ranger, but there are definitely clear delineated paths if you want to kind of max out the one style you want to pick. Those are focusing mostly on ranged combat, and you could either go with precision if you want to do bonus damage on your first attack, if you're talking about the Hunter's Edge, or if you want to shoot a lot, then you can go with the Flurry. And there's a bunch of upgrade traits that if you want to wield a bow or a crossbow or even thrown weapons, some of these feats would qualify for thrown weapons, although not every option is going to really focus in on thrown objects. Usually it's crossbows or bows for the most part. Like I said, as some of the feats don't qualify for thrown weapons. The second one, obviously, is the 2-weapon fighting, classic 2-weapon fighting Ranger, where you can become a whirling blaze of spinning death. And at the same time, you can gain some much needed defenses, since you do, as a Ranger, lose out on heavy armor proficiency, unless you take a feat for that later. Or you can focus on your skills, utilizing the ability to identify creatures and gain some benefits, normally requiring a critical hit or critical success on your recall knowledge, and a wide variety of knowledges, but eventually, with the certain upgrade feats, you can get the same benefits on just a plain success, and then eventually use your nature skill to identify all monsters, instead of having a specific knowledge with a specific monster. You can even get free actions to identify your hunted prey when you take that action. The other main avenue is your Animal Companion. There's a bunch of Animal Companion upgrade feats. You can also dabble into focus spells when you don't have an upgrade feat for your particular style, and always having a flanking companion with you, or maybe someone to bother them as you're shooting people with arrows from hundreds of feet away. Now come the cons, because every class has cons, otherwise everyone would be playing a Ranger, and the Ranger is the perfect class. First, you do lose out on major spellcasting from the Druid, as they are relegated to just focus spells called Warden spells. And you have to take feats to get them. Druids get them by being Druids. You have to take feats to be able to gain spellcasting. And compared to the fighter, you are less armored. I've mentioned this multiple times. You are less armored, and you also have less access to weapon training. You don't get advanced weapon training like the fighters do, and your weapon training doesn't max out to legendary. I think fighters are the only ones that get that. So you do have less general weapon training, and a lot of your abilities focus on your hunted prey's target. So limiting your effectiveness on targeting things that are not that target. And if you're going down the skills route, you have more demands on your stats than a generic fighter does. Fighters can just take on the physical stats. If you're talking about, I hate to use the word min-maxing because people think it's a bad thing. If you want to focus on the one thing your character's good at, fighters have an easier time with their stats because I take the physical stats. And maybe I can buff my charisma a little bit and get some intimidation in there, right? If I'm focusing on a skill Ranger, some of the skills require wisdom. Some of the skills require intelligence. Of course, I'm going to be, I want to have a high AC because I don't have heavy armor proficiency. I want a high dex. Well, if I'm using melee weapons, I need strength. And I need constitution to hit points. So I have a lot of demands on my stats if I do go after these more specialized builds for Rangers. So at some point, Rangers can feel a bit stretched for those stats, depending on their play style, having to limit to certain aspects of the game the way they want to play it to lower their stats so they're not as good at certain things, or to say, okay, well, since I'm not good at that, I'm not going to do this, I'm going to do that over there. All right, so let's recap. Rangers are a mix of the martial prowess of a fighter, tossed in with a little bit of a druid and that nature aesthetic, makes a formidable character in the Ranger, able to single out a target, gaining some pretty substantial benefits against them, while you do lose some major benefits of spellcasting and heavy armor and advanced weapon training and legendary and attacking. You make up for it with your larger than average skill selection. You eventually max out with legendary perception, and a variety of options to make yourself a great all-around combatant, or a deadly melee combatant, or a range-focused combatant, even with a selection of animal companions to help you out, to give you flanking, to distract opponents, to get those support benefits. There are quite a bit of styles that you can play with the Ranger. But that's just this person's opinion. Sound up down in the comments down below if you've played one of these tree huggers who can snipe you from 100 yards out. But until then, thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more character dives just like this one. But until then, I am Steve from Nothing Ventured, Nothing Gamed. May all your die rolls be crits, and may you always roll max damage. See you later.